to the foundation in Everett, at that time the Greater Everett Community Foundation, and they've been managing those funds. Actually, we started out with the Snohomish County Community Foundation, but then it became, as I said, it merged. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Karri Matau, who's, as I said, the president and CEO. So welcome, Karri.
Great. Thank you all. I actually did a PowerPoint this morning just so I could have a few data points, because I think there are a few places where you all are going to want to see the list. I thought I would just briefly share a little bit more about our history. Dave knows it as well as anyone else. He's pretty much been with us since the beginning. Let me see, how do I advance this page down? No, what do I do? Next page. There we go. And then I thought I'd talk about some specific investments that we've made and are making in Arlington, and then share a little bit of details on the historical aspect of your funds, and then happy to leave room for questions or end the meeting early. So as Dave mentioned, our foundation began in 2001, and we did begin with a focus and predominantly donors around the Everett area. Dave and a few other folks outside of the Everett community were really instrumental in advocating for a community foundation that would serve the entire county. So we always had that in our spirit. But finally, in 2015, we changed our name to be more reflective of the work across the county, and really have spent most of our time since 2015 building networks beyond Everett, building relationships and partnerships with nonprofits and donors and community outside of Everett. So this is just some of the basic facts of who we are. We exist, community foundations exist across the nation. There's about 2,000 in the nation. We have about 22 across Washington state, and we are the foundation that serves Snohomish County. So we are a funder. That's how people commonly consider us. And we often help folks, instead of going off and starting their own family foundation, we often are a place where folks can come to have their charitable interests realized, either when they're alive, or we do a lot in estate planning work also. So today we hold 155 funds. So your scholarship fund is one of those 155 funds we hold, and they have the breadth of focus. They serve all different parts of our county. They serve everything from environmental work to homeless services to the arts, pretty much anything that you can think of that you would love in community. There's a possibility that we're funding something like that, or that we have a fund that specifically focuses on that. We've grown pretty rapidly. Community foundations tend to be a model historically that have grown quickly because they are about 100-year-old entities. So folks are still finding out the benefits of using community foundations. So right now we're at about $30 million in assets. And with folks who are giving to us in the future, we will be at about 70 million in the next decade. We'll be at another additional 70 million, so over $100 million foundation within the next decade is our projections. These are some of our 2020 numbers. We awarded $10 million in grants in 2020. That's super inflated because the county Human Services Department and the County Council allocated money to us. So they made us an intermediary organization, and we gave away about $5 million in CARES, federal CARES grant funding, mostly because we just told the county, you're really not skilled at this, let us do the work. And so we have a lot of the relationships throughout Snohomish County. So we awarded over 500 grants last year, and specifically 64 grants in those county CARES buckets that I just mentioned. We also are the entity that started the Snohomish County COVID Response Fund in the spring, sort of right when we were seeing that lockdowns were looking to happen. We convened with our United Way, the county. We pulled together a countywide response fund. We seeded it with 50,000 of our own money, went out and got about 200,000 in other donations, and then ended up raising $2 million in what we called rapid response grants. Some of this was what we learned from the mudslide work that we did in the community. We were fundraising in the community, doing a lot of work with the nonprofit sector during the mudslide. And one of the things that we learned out of that, after folks came together and talked about what does the community need in an emergency, we realized that a community needs absolute, fast, and instantaneous money before federal money can kick in or before government money can kick in. You need $50,000, $100,000, you know, the week that your emergency happens, not 2 months later. So we deployed the almost $2 million, $1.4 million out to the community. We just gave it out as quickly as the money came in from about April to June. And then we spent out pretty much all the money in that first blush. Here's a little detail about your Arlington Scholarship. Dave, this is really for you. I have a created date of 2003. Yeah, I know. That's what our records say. So your balance right now is just about 70,000. But I love this number right here. Look at how much your community has put into that fund since inception, 222,000. You've earned $55,000. I like to call that free money investments. And then your fee that you've paid since inception is $16,500. So your total awarded, this is like such a celebration moment, $222,000 is what you've awarded since inception of this scholarship fund. I'll just leave that there for a sec. My last slide. I don't know if I'm supposed to move this or if you can, yeah. So this is just grant funding in 2020 in the Arlington community. We ended up doing 110 grants to 16 different organizations. Those can range in size from a grant that might come from a donor, and it might be $2,000. And then some of these agencies received money, and it might have been 100,000. So like the Family Support Center, I think, got a ton of money from COVID, Arlington Food Bank, those sorts of agencies who were doing rapid response COVID grants were getting a lot more money. Let's see, I think that's my last slide. I'm sorry, my child's doing school. That's it. Stop sharing. So that's all I have in terms of sort of a sharing. Do you want to just turn it over to questions or comments?
Karri, could you talk a little bit about the advantages for getting tax deductions if someone in our club wanted to set up a family endowed fund or a designated fund of some sort?
Sure. Yeah. So as I said, of that list of 155 funds, most of those funds are created by families or individuals. So certainly some nonprofits create funds with us and some other community groups like Rotary, but most are created by a family. And so that is done mostly from families who have a generosity about them, who maybe give to a lot of different community groups, who can benefit from some tax savings, either through a sale of a business, appreciated stock, maybe more complicated real estate gifting. So anyone in your community who has thought about starting their own family foundation to do charitable work could use us in lieu of doing all of that IRS hassle, which is a family foundation. Most advisors, estate planners, and financial advisors will tell you a family foundation isn't worth starting unless you're at about $10 million in assets. So that's exactly what we do. We start a fund, usually minimum rate is around $25,000. Sometimes families do that up in their estate plans. Sometimes they do it with cash they might, or appreciated stock, or IRA distribution, required minimum distribution, is often a way that folks right now are starting funds with us because they have to give it away anyway, or they're going to be taxed on it. So those can be started for anything you love or you like, or your community, or it can be started to help the babies, or I always say, or save the salmon. So It really depends. Every fund is specifically tailored for what the donor wishes and what the donor wants for their legacy. Dave, do you have anything that you would add? You've done a lot of this work.
Well, if you want to create a donor advised fund, let's say you need a tax deduction this year, you can put that money with the foundation and take your deduction this year, and then you can defer making requests as to where those funds are going to be distributed later on, which is a nice feature to have for folks that have sold a big business or something and would have a lot of gain to report.
And then your money is invested. So it's pooled and invested with our $30 million. And then last year you would have received a 13% return on that investment.
Karri, this is Bob Campbell. Do you have, what's the role that a local board, like let's just use the senior center, for example, if they want to put X number of dollars into the foundation, they want this level of risk, they want the money to be used this way, they want to preserve asset. How do they set up those parameters, and what are the parameters of yours to pool it, invest it in certain funds, regardless of, how do you keep those balanced?
Yeah, that's awesome. Bob, you're setting me up with great question. Those are funds that we hold. I think we hold of our 155 funds. I think we have 35 agency funds or nonprofit funds that boards have decided that they, one, maybe have a savings that they are not ever going to access, or they have investments that they are managing themselves. Or they sometimes get a super surprise bequest gift and they're like, do we spend it all now or do we invest for our sustainability? Those are often the three conversations. So they're just a specific kind of fund that we hold for nonprofits. The nonprofit board talks about like all the kind of goals that they have. They give us the money. The way we invest for them is just pooled. Our investment ratio is moderate risk, with a goal of, I think, what is our investment target is 6 to 8% rate of return. And we're at 8.7 over a 10-year period of time. And then every year that agency, we just write them a check on their spendable calculation. So our spendable default out of all our funds for a legacy gift is a 4% right now. But agencies can write up to a 7% spending rate. Let's say they want to invade principal, or their donor doesn't care that you gave us the money. So they can write into it up to a 7% spendable rate. And you get that check once a year in an accounting way. And most people don't care about this, but Bob, I feel like you would care about this. So it's an asset on the nonprofit's books, and it's a liability on community foundation. It's the only fund that the IRS allows us to ever give back, because you're a nonprofit too. So there's an emergency clause that we put into that allows a nonprofit board to request your fund back if you ever need it. So it's very low risk now donors can't ever get their money back. You get a tax receipt, but agencies can. And and then they get a slight fee break. We don't charge them as much. They get a 1.75% fee on the investment.
Thank you.
So I might comment on one other aspect that I saw when I was practicing, and that is folks who wanted to pass to their kids the charitable giving aspect of their own lives. And so they would set up one of these funds, a designated fund, but the family, their kids or grandkids or whatever, would become a mini board of sorts to decide which charities, they have to be charities, 501c3s, that receive those funds. And I think that's really a neat aspect of something you can do with the community foundation.
Yeah, that's called it. And that specific type of fund is called donor advised. You've already mentioned that, Dave. And we have about 35 of those funds, and they're like charitable checking accounts. So a family starts one, they don't tell us what they're going to give to every year. They don't have to. But every year they get that spendable amount, and they might sit down with their family, or they send us a list. Here's who I want my money to go to this year. And every year it can change. It can go to different places. And those funds can be passed on, that advising can be passed on to family, children, other folks. Or it has a default in there, built in there for the donor, that if no one is advising this, where do you eventually want your money to go when you pass away, from those types of accounts. So there's a lot of checks and balances in the play in order to meet donor intent.
So Karri, one more accounting question. You said a 1.7% management fee. We got an 8.7% return. So the net, it'd be about a 7% return over 10 years to the not-for-profit.
Correct.
Very, very strong. Good, thank you.
Yeah, that nobody usually. Bob, are you an accountant? No.
He thinks he is.
A nerd.
You're a nerd. I love it.
All right, any other questions for Karri? All right, very good.